Thank you so much for joining us.
Of course, glad to be here with you, Nick, and good to see everyone.
Yeah. You've been a great pioneer on the issue of loneliness and social isolation. You were one of the first people to talk about it a great deal. You issued a landmark report as Surgeon General about this that I think historians may remember is the same level of significance as the famous Surgeon General report on smoking. Can you tell us a little bit about, I think still in America there are folks who see loneliness as, a mood, unfortunate, but not really significant. So can you tell us a little bit about why loneliness truly matters for, particularly for kids, but more generally for society?
Absolutely, Nick. And if you had asked me also about 10 years ago if this was an important health issue, I would have said, I'm not sure that it is, because I wasn't, quite aware of the science behind it. And even though I had experienced loneliness a lot myself as a child growing up who was shy and introverted and had a tough time making friends, and at the various points as an adult as well, even despite that, I didn't really think of it as a health issue. And just out of curiosity here, how many people here have somebody you know in your lives who are struggling with loneliness right now? Yeah, it's almost everyone. And we're not alone. Right now in America, 1 in 2 adults have measurable levels of loneliness, but the numbers are actually much higher among kids. And here's why it matters. Because what we've realized is that when people struggle with the sense of being disconnected from others, that is associated with a significant increase in mental health concerns like depression and anxiety specifically. But it's also associated with an increase in physical health concerns as well. So increased risk of cardiovascular disease, an increased risk of dementia among older people, increased risk of premature death. And when you look at the life-shortening impact, the mortality impact of being socially disconnected, it's actually on par with smoking daily. It's even greater than the mortality effect that we see associated with obesity. And you think about those two issues, smoking and obesity, as ones that we have no question that these are public health issues. Well, the important thing to understand now is that loneliness and isolation are public health issues as well of equal importance. And that's why I issued a Surgeon General's advisory on this topic, and it's why I believe that we have to address this as not just a critical health issue for individuals, but frankly as a societal health issue as well, because we know that when societies are more connected, when communities are more connected, they tend to be more economically prosperous. They tend to have lower rates of violence. They tend to be more resilient in the face of adversity, like hurricanes and tornadoes. And we certainly need more of that now. So that's why I think of loneliness as a health issue, a societal issue, as a national security issue, and one that should be a priority for our nation.
Your work deeply resonated with me, partly because I'm from an area in Oregon that has been struggling. We've talked about this. And when I first approached the issue and tried to understand the deaths of despair in my community, I thought it was, I looked at lost jobs, lost factory jobs. And clearly there was something to that. But then I thought back to the Great Depression. And you had not seen the same pathologies in the 1930s and 40s as you had more recently. And it does seem to me that the difference with the Great Depression is that there were social organizations that buffered the individual suffering and loss that no longer exist, and that we've lost some of that architecture. Is that a way of thinking of it? Oh.
So it's absolutely the case that we have lost a lot over the last half century or so. And so a few things have happened. One is, in the last half century, there's been a significant decline in participation in the community organizations that used to bring us together. Those include faith organizations, service organizations, recreational leagues, youth clubs. But we've also seen other things happening as well. We've seen that technology, while it's brought a lot of efficiencies and benefits into our life, has also actually reduced our social interaction in person. I can sit at home and order my groceries or order anything I want, online in terms of retail products. I don't need to go to the store. I'm not seeing people as often. We've seen that social media, which we'll talk about perhaps later in this conversation, has also had a profound impact on our relationships, perhaps one of the most transformative aspects of our lives over the last few decades in terms of changing our relationships. And often, unfortunately, not always for the better. It's shifted what used to be in-person relationships to online relationships. But also, if you look at the data, it's sort of clear. Stat after stat tells us that people know their neighbors less often. They tend to invite friends over less frequently. They tend to have fewer people that they count as friends and confidants that they could go to in a crisis. So you put all of this together, and we've had a number of forces that have been building that have contributed to this loneliness. And lastly, just keep this in mind. It's important just to recognize that loneliness isn't not having people around you. People can be surrounded by hundreds of people and feel profoundly lonely. I just came back from a college tour where I was traveling around the country, meeting with college students and about the issue of loneliness and isolation. And I'll tell you this very interestingly, that I've been Surgeon General now in 2 different stints and probably done many, many, many events. I have never experienced the kind of demand and engagement in events that I saw on those college campuses. Because that speaks, I think, to the deep hunger the young people have for connection and their recognition. They have a lot of insight into this, into the fact that they are, in fact, struggling with loneliness and isolation. I met students on campus who said to me, look, I've been surrounded by all of these people on campus, but none of them really know me. I just feel like I can't be myself. I feel really alone. Another student approached me on one of the campuses and said, and in all seriousness, he said, how are we supposed to start conversations with other people when that's not really the culture? Like, you just don't go up to somebody and start talking to them. People have their earbuds in. They're looking at their phones. It feels like we're disturbing other people or intruding in their space. So there wasn't a comfort with that. On some of the college campuses I visited, I noticed that the volume in the dining halls and the hallways was actually a lot lower than what I recall when I was in college. When I was in college, the loudest place was the dining hall. Everyone was just...
We were loud kids.
Yeah, but people were actually talking, right? But that's not happening as much. So, I was really struck by the fact that we have young people surrounded by their peers, yet feeling like they're on an island by themselves. It is painful. Like, the experience of loneliness literally is painful because emotional pain can be interpreted by our brain as physical pain. Yet for many young people, they don't know a way out of it. When I talk to colleges, I often ask them, I said, the issues young people are raising are the fact that, number one, they don't necessarily feel like they have the tools, skills, comfort, or culture to be able to start interactions with other people. They're also saying that they're really struggling to manage technology and social media in their lives. My question to the colleges was, I know this is not a problem you created, but how are you thinking about how to address that on college campuses? And that was tough for a lot of colleges. They didn't feel like that was something that they necessarily it wasn't part of their charge, when they first, built their programs, yet it is a need that college students are facing today. So I think if you put all this together, you see the forces have been building for a while, but it has reached a real crescendo. And my worry is that if we do not do something quickly to address loneliness, to build a sense of real belonging and community, we are at risk of losing an entire generation of young people as we see that loneliness driving, I think, being a significant factor in the youth mental health crisis that we're facing today.
My sense, which I'm not very confident in, is that the U.S. problem may be greater than that in other countries, but that actually other countries are taking this more seriously as a policy matter. So that Britain for years now has had a minister for loneliness. I think Japan had a minister for loneliness. I'm not sure they still do. A number of countries have tried to have grants to local organizations to try to knit people together or encourage volunteering, which both helps the person who is reached by the volunteer and also gets the volunteer out of the house. So are there lessons we can learn from other countries about policy solutions at the government level to try to knit people together and address this problem?
Absolutely. And you're right that, look, this is a global problem, Nick. As you know, you've written about this at length as well, which I so appreciate because that's helping to people understand that this is a real public health issue. But yeah, Japan, UK, Australia, they have all for years now recognized this as a national health concern in their countries. We have finally started to do that here. It's one of the reasons we put our report out, we laid out a framework for a national strategy. And we've seen now more and more policymakers who are stepping up to ask, how can we now devise policies that will help invest in communities? Because part of what we need to do is build social infrastructure in our communities. We're used to thinking about physical infrastructure, roads, bridges, highways. But there's social infrastructure as well, the programs, the policies, the structures that help bring people together and foster healthy relationships. And that could be supporting community organizations that bring people together, creating more spaces that are walkable where people can actually gather. There are a lot of ways to help build the social infrastructure of a community. So I'm encouraged that more of that is starting to happen here, but I think we have to learn from other countries. And I think if you look at some of the work the UK has been doing, some of the national conversation that they spurred helped to destigmatize loneliness in a country, which is very important. They, as you mentioned, appointed a cabinet-level minister to oversee their work on loneliness. But they also actually started experimenting with work on the community side. For example, they had a social prescribing program, which they built a few years ago. So if you went to a doctor and your doctor realized that, hey, I think my patient might be struggling with loneliness, they may not feel like they have all the tools to fix it, but what they could do is, in the same way they might refer someone to physical therapy, they could actually refer someone to a community member who was part of a network of organizations who could then take that patient and help place them or introduce them to organizations where they could meet other people, build relationships. And so that kind of merging between community and the healthcare system, something they called social prescribing, is another experiment that has been sort of underway in the UK. We can learn from all of that. And I think what it means to us is we've got to destigmatize loneliness here. We've got to invest in research to broaden our understanding of its impact and solutions. And we've got to work on implementing solutions with communities. The good news is that government alone, is not going to solve the loneliness challenge. This is actually a place where all of us as individuals, in our roles in leading community institutions, we can make a big difference in fostering connection. We can do that in our workplaces, asking ourselves, do we actually know how connected people are in our workplace? Is that something that we measure? If the answer is no, there are tools we can use to measure it. And it's worth doing so because the data actually shows us that when people are feeling lonely in the workplace, it negatively impacts their creativity, their engagement, their retention, their overall productivity and output. So this really matters. I think about it in schools as well, in the education system. How can we foster a sense of belonging among young people? Because if education is about creating the foundation for a happy, healthy, fulfilling life for our children, for the future, building relationships has to be a key part of that. And so I really applaud many of the school districts that are investing in social and emotional learning for their kids, because our kids, we can't assume that they will just acquire the skills and tools they need to build healthy relationships. They have to see that modeled, they have to learn from it, and they have to have the opportunities with caring people around them to actually experiment and build and grow their relationships.
We thought that smartphones were going to connect us all. Instead, they seem to have disconnected us all. My understanding of the data is that the impact has been greater on girls than on boys, as best we can measure it. Is that true, and do we believe that is because that this is a real, authentic effect? Somebody earlier in the day mentioned that girls are more prone to social comparison than boys, maybe for that reason or for others. Or is it that girls are more frank in acknowledging to researchers their loneliness, while boys, pretend that they don't have a problem?
Yeah, and somehow that seems to continue into adulthood as well when it comes to, I say that as a man who sometimes has trouble acknowledging that I have problems too. But in all seriousness, look, the data does show that girls seem to experience more harassment, certainly on social media. 6 out of 10 adolescent girls say that they've been approached by strangers in the social media in ways that have made them feel uncomfortable. So we know that the girls tend to experience more of that. I do wonder, though, and believe, in fact, that I do think that there's significant underreporting when it comes to boys. And what I'm not so sure about is why that is. Is that because they know they have it, are struggling, but don't feel comfortable talking about it? Is that they don't have insight into the fact that they're struggling? Like, which one of those it is, I think it's probably some combination of the two. But I think when we look at young people more broadly in technology, what has concerned me the most in recent years has been what social media has been doing to kids. Look, technology at the end of the day is a tool. It's how we design it and how we use it that determines whether it helps or hurts us. I say that as somebody who's used technology, somebody who spent years building a technology company in a different space. Like, I'm a believer in technology, but only when we fully understand how it's impacting us and we design and adjust accordingly. When it comes to social media, the reason I issued a Surgeon General's advisory on social media and youth mental health was because I was seeing that the data I was seeing was quite alarming. It was telling us that, while yes, there are some benefits that our kids may experience from social media in terms of an outlet for their creativity, an opportunity to find community sometimes where they may not have one, of people with shared experiences, backgrounds, etc. What we're finding is that when kids are spending on average 3 or more hours a day on social media, those kids seem to face double the risk of anxiety and depression symptoms. We're finding that nearly half of adolescents are saying that using social media makes them feel worse about their body image. That a third of adolescents are saying that they're staying up till midnight or later on weeknights on their devices, and much of that is social media use, at a time when we know that sleep disruption and deprivation has a negative impact on the mental health of kids. Right? So one question is, if we know that now, it's not like social media came on the scene yesterday, or last year, or 5 years ago. It's been here for nearly 2 decades. But what we have utterly failed to do as society is to protect our kids from the harms of social media. We have failed at that, and we have to look at that and acknowledge that. We have left this up to technology companies to look out for our children, whereas most of the platforms are driven by a revenue model that is maximized when they maximize how much time our kids spend on the platform. Now, as a dad, as a doctor, as Surgeon General, what I want is not to maximize how much time our kids are on these platforms. I want to make sure that that time is well used. I want to make sure that they're protected. I want to make sure that it supports their self-worth and their sense of community. But where's the data that shows us that that's actually happening? For all of the safety provisions and adjustments and modifications and features that platforms say that they are making, where's the data that tells us that it's having an impact and it's protecting our kids from the downside risk? And frankly, where are policymakers in all of this, in terms of putting forward the kind of safety standards that our children need in order to protect them from harm? What has happened up until now is the entire burden of managing this has fallen on the shoulders of parents and kids. And that is just absolutely unfair. How is any mom or dad who didn't grow up with this technology supposed to figure out all the rapidly evolving features of these platforms and manage and protect their kids? I have sat with so many parents who have lost their children to suicide after being mercilessly bullied and harassed on social media. Parents who have seen their children get fed videos through the algorithms on their social media platforms that have suggested that their child actually take their own life and have in fact walked them through how to do it. Those parents have come to me and said, how is it possible that my child was allowed to see these videos, that it was in fact suggested to them in their algorithm? So we have placed an unreasonable burden on parents right now. And children and parents are both suffering as a result of this. And this is why in my advisory I laid out that we have a responsibility to immediately put in place safety standards that will help protect kids. Safety standards like what we did for automobiles. You know, when I was growing up, Nick, there was a very high rate of motor vehicle accident-related deaths. And we didn't just say, hey, you know, that's just the price of modernity. We said we can fix this. We can do something about it. We put safety standards in place that got us seatbelts, airbags, crash testing. We have an obligation to do the same thing here.
So let me ask you about that model, in fact, that if you think about areas where the U.S. has achieved real progress in behavior change, for example, or in social policy, then it is things like auto accidents, it's teen pregnancy rates have come down more than 60%, it's smoking, teen smoking has gone way down. And what is characteristic of all these is that there's been no silver bullet. There's been essentially silver buckshot. And it's a public health approach where there's no one thing that, you know, reduces mortality 20%. It's a bunch of things that reduce it 1%. Should we be thinking in addressing child poverty, in addressing mental health of children, in addressing the range of issues that we're talking about, should we be thinking more about a public health approach that emulates that kind of model of a bunch of little things that very, very incrementally create modest advances?
So I'm glad you brought up the public health approach, Nick, because I do think that we should be taking a public health approach to these challenges, recognizing their public health impact. And what that means, in part, is number one, investing in understanding first the root causes of the problem. Sometimes what you see is not always what is driving a problem. For example, the fact that certain health outcomes are tightly linked to poverty would not have been immediately obvious to someone 20, 30 years ago, someone who wasn't necessarily familiar with the social determinants of health. But we've learned since then that housing, poverty, education, a lot of these actually have a pretty profound impact on our health and well-being. In addition to understanding the root causes, you also want to understand who is most deeply affected, right? So you can focus your efforts and resources. Third, you want to make sure that you're devising solutions appropriately, implementing them and actually studying those solutions. It seems obvious, but so many times solutions get implemented and then people move on. And the question of did they actually work doesn't often get asked. Or did they work for everyone or just for a few people? And then finally, you have to scale up solutions that work. And solutions aren't, to your point, Nick, necessarily one intervention that solves the whole problem. A lot of times it's a series of interventions that help reduce harm and collectively get to a place where the vast majority of people are in fact protected. That is the kind of approach that we should be taking here. Now, that requires a serious investment, but it also requires attention. And I say that because one thing that we see happen a lot these days is public attention rapidly shifting from one issue to another, and that often gets mirrored in legislative bodies too, where you see it, attention shifting. To address this issue, the youth mental health crisis, really requires sustained attention. It's about technology. It's also about poverty. It's also about violence. It's also about loneliness and isolation. It's about a number of factors that we've got to address with focus and with resources. And if we don't do that, I worry that we are going to continue to find ourselves in a deeper youth mental health crisis. And our kids just don't have time, unfortunately, to wait.
A question about how we apply that attention.
Yeah.
I think there's a pretty good case that there's a correlation between the youth mental health crisis and social media algorithms that highlight negative information, the world is ending, the kind of catastrophism that we see. And I think it's reasonable to hold social media organizations accountable for that in ways that maybe lead young people to be a little overwhelmed. But I also think about my unofficial algorithm as a journalist, and about more generally the way we in the media cover the world, and frankly about the way advocates and nonprofit organizations cover the world. And I think we've all learned that the way to get attention to social problems is to jump up and down and highlight them. And that's a way of getting resources. It's a way of getting attention and publicity. I wonder whether we should be doing a better job, whether in the media or nonprofits or as Surgeon Generals, in not just highlighting the problems, but doing more to highlight solutions and areas where there have been progress, and whether that, if we're going to hold social media organizations accountable, we should also do more to hold ourselves accountable in that way.
So I love that, and I think you're right, because I think right now for many, and this is what young people tell us all the time, their picture of the world often is shaped by the information that's flowing to them through social media, through their phones, and through sites they may visit, news, etc. Not many of them are watching the news. That's just the way it is. They tend to get most of the information on social media, in fact. But a lot of that information tends to be very negative. It tends to tell them everything that's broken about the world. Now, it's not that you want people to be unaware of the challenges we face, but when the information they're consuming is so skewed that everything they're finding is telling them what's broken about the world, you come to believe that the world is irreversibly broken. It weighs on you. And unlike when I was growing up, and perhaps many of us were growing up in this room, a time when if you wanted to turn off the flow of information, you literally just turned off the TV. You can't quite do that now. It's very hard to shut it off. It's coming at you constantly. This is a place where perception does become reality. And if the reality, though, is that if you go into communities, if you think about your own lives, about your friend circles, about your neighborhoods, my suspicion is that you can probably find things that are happening in the groups of people around you that are actually quite good. They're quite heartening. They're quite reassuring. You might find that there are people in your circle of friends who are actually helping one another. You might encounter a stranger who stops on the bus to check on someone who looks like they're not feeling well. You might see a bus driver who could just speed on but stops because they see there's somebody running to catch the bus. These are small moments of kindness that we might dismiss as saying, that's not representative of what's happening around the country. But I'll tell you, that's actually what I see when I travel around the country. It doesn't always make the news. People aren't posting about it on social media. But it's actually a real part of our human experience that's positive and that's uplifting. And I do think that because we can't see that as clearly, I think it has contributed to our sense that the world is fundamentally and irreparably broken. And I just don't think that that is the case. I do think we have real problems that need to be fixed. But that skewed perspective drains us of our energy, which is a fuel that we need, in fact, to fix those very problems. And so I think we do ourselves a disservice when we're not highlighting the good things that are actually happening. One last thing that I just want to share on this account is, I want you to all just to, if you will, with me for a moment, I want you to think about a moment in your life when you felt a real sense of being cared for by other people. When other people looked out for you, when they valued you for who you were, not for what you could do for them, but for who you were. Now, I want you to think about another time in your life when you felt a real sense of purpose. A sense of purpose that was bigger than you. It was actually connected to something else. Maybe it was a broader mission. Maybe it was to serve other people, but you really felt like you had a purpose. And just think about how that felt for a moment. And lastly, I want you to think about a time when you extended kindness to someone else. You helped somebody. You checked in on a friend who was having a hard time. And you stopped by just to be with someone, even if you didn't know how to fix their problem, just because you didn't want them to feel alone. Those three experiences, just raise your hand if those felt good. Okay. What I was describing is the feeling of belonging, the feeling of purpose, and the feeling of having a circle of concern that extends beyond you. So much so that you extend kindness and care and generosity to others. Those three elements, there's good science that tells us that those are actually really important for our health. And here's how to think about them. We think about our body, the things we need to do to have a healthy body. Think about our mind, things we need to do to have a healthy mind. But what about our heart and soul? That's what actually fuels us. That's what gives us inspiration, gives us the energy we need to go about and do the things that we want to do in our daily life. It turns out a lot of that comes from our sense of belonging, our sense of purpose, our sense of having a circle of concern greater than ourselves. Right now, the question that I find myself thinking about is what is helping cultivate the heart and soul, the health of the heart and soul of our kids? Are they getting that in school? Are they getting that at home? Are they getting that in their neighborhoods? Or are they seeing that modeled in the workplaces that they enter? Are they seeing that modeled in the leaders that they look up to in society? What is nurturing that? And I'm sharing this with you because I think that there is this dimension of health that we have largely not talked about as being, but it's essential to our health and well-being. And this is a time right now when I think we are struggling because there are so many people who don't feel a sense of belonging, who don't feel that there's necessarily a sense of purpose that is animating their lives, who don't necessarily feel anchored in other people. And when I talk to young people, the last college I just went to, I asked one of the group of students I was talking to, I said, when you think about purpose, what society is telling you your purpose should be, what is it? And one of the girls just looked at me. They all looked at each other first. And you could tell that they all kind of knew what they were going to say. And then one girl just said to me, she said, it's money, cars, and fame. And I said, what do you mean? She's like, I'm not sure that's going to make me happy, but it seems to be, that's what society is telling us success is. That broke my heart. You know, as a father of a 6 and 7 year old, my 5-year-old just turned 6 yesterday, so I'm getting used to that. But as the dad of a 6 and 7 year old, if my children grew up feeling lonely, feeling like that purpose really only extended to the acquisition of wealth and fame for themselves, who didn't feel like the world was telling them that it was important to be kind, to be considerate, to serve others, I would be heartbroken. Not just because those are the values I want for them as a dad, but because I know that those are the keys to their health, their fulfillment, their happiness, their inner strength. When you have these elements, and we're feeding the heart and soul of our children, it generates peace and fulfillment. It generates inner strength and resilience. And so many young people are telling us that they're feeling the opposite of that right now. So this is one of the things I think we have to consider. It's an issue that we're now increasingly working on in our office, to think about this dimension of health. But I share that with all of you here today because I know that the folks in this room are such an important group of educators, early childhood experts, philanthropists, clinicians, people from across society who are here because you care about kids. And I think all of us have to ask ourselves, what can we do to help feed and support and nurture the heart and soul of our children who are struggling? This does not mean that it's not important also to ensure kids have access to healthcare, including especially mental health care. It doesn't mean it's not important to get at the root causes, including technology. But I worry that if we lose sight of the fact that our kids need a sense of belonging, purpose, and a connection to folks in a circle of concern greater than themselves, and we will have lost, may have won a few battles, so to speak, but have lost the overall fight to ensure our kids are well. So that's one of the reasons I'm grateful that you're here today. This is the issue that I care deeply about, the well-being of our kids, and animates me, and I know so many of us. I travel when I go around the country with 2 socks in my suitcase. Not my own socks, I have more than two socks. But I have 2 socks that belong to my children when they were infants. I have one for each of them. And I carry those in my suitcase. A lot of times I'll carry them in my pocket, but I do so because that's my reminder of what the stakes are. This isn't, the health and well-being of our kids isn't just one more issue to add to the long list of problems that society faces. This is the foundational issue of our time. If we cannot take care of our kids, we cannot secure the future of society. If we cannot take care of our kids, and we fail the moral test of humanity, which is to make sure that our youngest, that are most vulnerable, are supported, are nurtured, are looked out for. I know that all of us individually, there is nothing that we wouldn't do if a child that we loved was in deep trouble. I just got a call from my wife about an hour ago. She texted me to say, I have an update for you. That's ominous words coming from my wife. She says, I have an update. I was like, oh God, what happened? I called and she said, well, something happened with Tejas, with our son. He got hit by another kid in class. He's a bump on his head and scratches all over his body. And my heart leapt into my throat. I just wanted to leave here, get on a flight, go back there, and make sure he was okay. Now, thankfully, my wife is much superior to me in terms of being a parent and caretaker, and my son's in good hands. But my point is that if any child that we loved was in trouble, we would go to the mat to fight for them, to be there for them. And the question is, why can't we do that as a society when so many of us feel that way? And I think part of the reason is that parents are out there struggling by themselves. When I talk to so many parents, as I have thousands of parents at this point over the last few years, many of them almost tell me about these struggles of managing social media, concerns with the mental health of their kids in hushed tones because they don't know that other parents are struggling too. They think that they failed as parents and everyone else has it all together. But we know the truth. The truth is that parents across the board are having a hard time. We need to speak up about these issues. We need to support each other on these issues. We need to get rid of the incorrect knowledge, if you will, or bizarre idea that tells us that somehow we should be ashamed if society has failed our children. That is not the case. We were not meant to raise our kids alone. We were meant to raise our kids together. And that's the ethic we've got to reestablish.
Well, thank you so much for expanding the prism of our understanding here of health and well-being, and for all the work you're doing to do the same for the country as a whole. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Nick. Thanks, everyone.